And welcome back to the Infowars Nightly News. This is our Syrian opposition, Syrian rebel panel, I guess you would say. We have a lot of news we want to talk about these rebels, about the whole situation that's going in Syria. Also, I'm joined here by David Knight. Nice to see you, David.
Hey, Jakar.
And also Dr. Jerome Corsi, who is joining us via Skype. How are you, Doctor?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Now, Doctor, during the break, you were telling us about some information that you were looking into on John McCain and the company he keeps in Syria.
Well, you know, first of all, the shifting story is now that John Kerry has been accused of lying, saying that the rebels were not al-Qaeda. Well, you know, we all know the rebels are, at least a great number of the rebels in Syria are al-Qaeda. And so today the effort's been by the administration to try to say, well, wait a minute, some of these rebels are good guys. Well, I started going back to some of the pictures. For instance, remember when John McCain was in Syria? This was just recently. He was in Syria in August, and he shows up and he's pictured with all these so-called Syrian freedom fighters around him. Well, one of the guys gets identified as Muaz Mustafa. He was a smiling man in the right-hand side of the picture where McCain is. And this guy Mustafa has been in Libya. He's been all over the Middle East. He's identifies with the Palestinians. He's got all kinds of posts on Twitter and Facebook that make it clear he's really I'd call him a freelance revolutionary, a freelance, you know, kind of a mercenary, al-Qaeda kind of mercenary. Maybe not technically al-Qaeda, but he's clearly not a good guy. And here, you know, we've got McCain buddying up with him.
And McCain says, you know, I had no idea who these guys were at the time that I met them.
Yeah, well, you know, that's pretty bright, isn't it? I mean,
just meets up with random people in the Middle East.
Yeah, let's just fly over the Middle East and taking pictures with a bunch of Middle Eastern guys who don't know who they are. I mean, sure, come on, give me a break.
Yeah.
This is obvious public relations type picture where McCain's got, you know, his buddy photo with a group of smiling Syrian guys with, you know, beards, look like young guys. And so here the idea is these guys can't be all that bad. Of course, you start looking at who they are, and they've been mercenaries all over. One of them, this Mustafa, is even claiming to have access to the White House. What's he got access to the White House for? And then, you know, the other thing I've been researching through the day is that this FSA, this group of Free Syrian Army, is the group that the State Department, CIA today are wanting to settle on. Is, oh, well, these are really the guys. You know, these are really the good guys. Well, you know, then I found a Brookings Institute paper that goes back to March 2012. It was called Saving Syria. Of course, the whole article talks about how you destroy Syria, basically. You go in there to destroy the Assad regime. That's the whole, you know, so clearly the Brookings Institute, and I'm also confident the Council on Foreign Relations, going back probably 2, 3, 4 years, have been strategizing, maybe more, how we destabilize Syria. And the options were all laid out. The option they seem to think is going to work the best is the invading with troops. And then the Brookings Institute somehow or other thinks that it'll get paid for by the European Union and the Arab states.
And Dr. Corsi, if I could interrupt you briefly, I just want to hit that point that you laid out there, the ground troops. We saw a report recently, and even today I reported on the Infowars Nightly News earlier, that they had 75,000 ground troops. You know, is the estimate they think is what is necessary to secure Syria. And
they've been planning this for a while. I mean, they've been planning to go in, send in ground troops to get rid of chemical weapons, and he drew that line exactly a year before the attack happened.
Well, I think that's been the plan. See, what I'm coming up to the conclusion is that this has been a long time brewing. Council on Foreign Relations and Brookings Institute, probably other think tanks in Washington, deciding how they can destabilize Syria and get rid of Assad. And it looks like that, you know, looking at all the options, they figured, well, we're going to have to send some ground troops in there. So we better have a pretext. The pretext, a real good one, might be chemical weapons.
Right. They were just waiting for something to happen, regardless if it was provocateur or not. just any excuse they can to go in and, just seize the country. That's what they're going to do.
Well, a long time ago, Wesley Clark talked about the sequence of countries that they were going to go in, and this is following along that sequence. But their plans have gotten very specific. But their lies are about as transparent as the emperor's clothes, right? I mean, nobody's buying this. Everybody is the public here is laughing at it. Foreign governments are laughing at them. Between this and the NSA spying scandals, the American regime has basically become an international laughingstock, a pariah.
Even McCain admitted that. He said we have barely any credibility left.
That's right. Well, they don't have any credibility because they lie.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Hello. Come on, guys. What they are doing, what this Brookings Institute paper is, it's Brookings Institute memo number 21. Look it up. It's called Saving Syria, Assessing Options for Regime Change. And it's written by 4 heavyweights in the Brookings Institute crowd on Iran, mostly Iran. And what these guys are talking about is they want to get Iran. To get Iran, they want to destabilize Syria. That's the whole point. And they're trying to find which method is going to work better. They decide they probably better invade with troops, and then the pretext is going to be Assad's a bad guy who uses chemical weapons. Now, if this cover story is created in 2012, and maybe before, and we're just playing it out today, this is obviously, making the facts fit a lie.
Yeah. And we've seen several chemical attacks that have already been determined by the UN as being chemical attacks carried out by rebels.
And also Russia did their own investigation of the earlier attack, and they said they have a 100-page report they submitted to the UN, and that's the reason the UN went in the first place.
Well, I read the report of the UN. In fact, I quoted it in WND extensively because the UN went over. These charges were made by Obama in March and April of this year when he was in Israel, and he's been beating this drum for a while. So the UN sent a team in there, and the team came back and they said, no, the rebels probably have been using chemical gas. And that would actually make sense. I mean, the rebels are losing, they're fighting, scrambling. The rebels would like to prove that Assad, or like to make it seem like Assad was using, kind of like a rebel false flag to feed the CIA with the information they want, so they have a pretext on the world scene to come in and attack Assad. But Assad's sitting there, and Assad's saying, wait a minute, why would I ever use chemical weapons? I don't need to use chemical weapons. I got an army, I got an air force.
Exactly.
I'm beating these guys. And besides, if you look at the areas that were hit and who the victims were, there were as many Assad loyalists killed in the population as anybody. These were not attacks in the rebel strongholds.
This last weekend, there was a MSNBC panel, and they had a former Bush administration person who is now at the university. Her name was, she was a Ms. Mann Leverett. And she was very specific about what they found when they investigated back in May. They said the sarin gas was not industrially produced, nor were the delivery mechanisms industrially produced. They were homemade. So that's why they all identified that as being the rebels at that time. So certainly they have access to it. But of course, Kerry, I guess, realizing that this was going to unravel on him, said, well, we don't care who did it. It's just that they're there is why we have to go there. Right?
Well, Kerry, Kerry's a professional liar, so it doesn't really make any difference what Kerry says. He's been all over the board in so many positions.
Even Putin said that about him recently.
He is. Kerry has lacked credibility since I wrote an Unfit for Command on him and exposed him with John O'Neill. Look, Kerry is just a hack. It's about the best way you can put Kerry. Here's the issue. The issue is this, that this chemical attack business, because the Assad government put out the films that we've all been showing about these, caches of chemicals that were in the Syrian rebels' strongholds with chemicals from Saudi Arabia, and looks like a home chemistry set of mix up your own poison. That's not government issue. That's the rebels. Well, if you go back, let's just go back for a minute. We had Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons against the Kurds back in the 1980s. We had the war between Iraq and Iran throughout the 1980s. How many, 8 years, how many people did they kill between the two countries? They're using chemical weapons all the time. Was the United States or the United Nations in the middle because we were concerned that some red line had been crossed? I don't remember that.
Exactly, and when we look at weapons of mass destruction, look at our history of weapons of mass destruction and use and how we had sarin gas up until it was banned in the 1990s. But we've also are still using depleted uranium, which has a tremendous long-term effect on the survivors in an area as well as on the soldiers who use it. And what really scares me in terms about weapons of mass destruction is what DARPA is working on in terms of these killer robots that they're now working on giving them some autonomous decision making. And that's a situation where you put those things in an area, they could use regular projectile weapons or they could use chemical weapons if they wanted to, but they could basically go in and kill every living, moving thing in an area that didn't have a Defense Department tag on it.
Well, see, there's no doubt the chemical weapons are very frightening. But my point is that the governments like the United States have learned how to use chemical weapons as a false flag. So that rebels, who are the ones who are utilizing the weapons, that's all the UN incredible information we've got. All the research I've done, I've published pictures in WND of the rebels in Syria loading these blue, kind of like almost homemade cans on top of some kind of a rocket launching device.
And they show this on the major networks. Just to interrupt you briefly, Dr. Corsi, they show this footage on the mainstream networks with the Al-Qaeda logo on the videos, and they're saying, you know, this is the Assad regime.
Yeah, I mean, a government launch of chemical weapons is going to look a lot more professional. Okay, it's not going to look like this ragtag. You know, let's mix it up in the basement with a chemistry set.
They're like a couple of frat guys out there having a weekend.
Yeah, and so suddenly, this is the information the CIA seizes on. They get some intercepts, probably intercepts, if we could hear these radio intercepts, are, you know, Syrian commanders saying, what's going on? You know, we didn't do this. Who did this? You know, and so now we've got the Syrian military talking about the gas attack. So, of course, the CIA, let's use that as evidence that proves they were responsible for it.
And they actually contradicted themselves. They used some Israeli intelligence saying about the episode you just mentioned, but then they came out and said, well, we saw them moving around and making plans and distributing gas masks 3 days prior. And so the questions were they didn't warn anybody, but if there was premeditated planning on the part of the Syrian administration, then why would they be reacting in a surprised way? So even the White House's briefing paper is contradictory.
And if you read this Brookings Institute report, I mean, I'm looking on page 14 of it, okay? It says, this is all a scenario in 2012. The United States will want to build within the Friends of Syria a smaller contact group, regardless of which approach is taken. Indeed, should Assad not fall, this group would also be vital for containing the spillover from a Syrian civil war. In addition, the United States will want to expand ties to Syria opposition and try to push them to be more cohesive. So, in other words, it looks like the Brookings Institute, the Council on Foreign Relations, probably even the CIA, 2 years ago almost or longer, had identified this FSA as going to be the group that they were going to champion as the good guys among the rebels. Well, everything I've done with the FSA is finding out they're about as ragtag and as penetrated by mercenaries and Al-Qaeda bad guys as anybody else. I can't find anybody on this Syrian opposition group that is a good guy. They all want a Sharia state. They all want Islamic control. They're opposing Assad because Assad is secular. And we're going to pick one of these guys and say these are the good guys. I mean, that cover story isn't going to fly.
Meanwhile, we're funding these people.
Well, of course we are, because it was the cover story. We passed resolutions, we're supposed to send them arms. You got John McCain running over there and, you know, having buddy photos taken with the Syrian rebels, not realizing he's probably standing with two of the most mercenary in the whole group. But they speak English, so they're educated, and he, you know, in English, and he says, well, these have to be good guys.
Well, I guess when I look at this, Dr. Corsi, the thing that comes across to me is that this is the same sort of thing we've seen over and over again. We get involved in a conflict where there isn't a good guy, and we wind up selling arms to both sides. We wind up eventually going to war against both sides, using up a lot of weapons, spending a lot of money, and a lot of people dying. And I think people are getting really tired of that. You know, on Friday night, CNN was talking about how Obama was war-weary, but I think it's the American people that are war-weary. You had an article talking about on WND saying that calls to Congress are running 499 to 1 against the Syrian war.
Well, see, what I'm saying here is that you've got another false flag of pushing people to war.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it's the Lusitania sinking or whether it's the Gulf of Tonkin, and we don't find out until years later that the Maddox was in the Gulf of Tonkin doing intelligence work, and there weren't any fishing boats that were equipped with torpedoes that attacked them from North Vietnam. It was all a CIA lie.
Yes, yes.
Well, again, what we got here is that the CIA is cooking up another lie.
Yeah.
And this lie, which was originally hatched in the Brookings Institute, the Council on Foreign Relations, was, hey, why don't we accuse Assad of chemical weapons? Then we can go in and attack him and get rid of him. And the truth is, if you really read these documents that were written 2 years ago or more by the Council on Foreign Relations or the Brookings Institute, they knew then that airstrikes weren't going to do anything. The whole idea was, let's get airstrikes. You know, it was like a Cuban Missile. It was like Bay of Pigs, where the CIA tried to bamboozle John Kennedy and say, oh, well, these rebels from, the self-trained rebels who we were training in Nicaragua are going to go back in, they're going to capture Cuba, the Bay of Pigs, it's going to be fine. We send in a few B-26s. And the CIA knew from the beginning that wouldn't work, and they were trying to corner Kennedy where he would launch strikes off an aircraft carrier.
Exactly. Now, Dr. Corsi, our time is winding down. Go ahead and finish your thought, please. Yes.
It's a false flag lie concocted as a cover story in order to bamboozle the American people to get another pointless, stupid war.
And they've been doing that successfully for so long. This time it didn't work. And that's what I think is the real story here, is that this time, and I think that's what surprised them, they have seen this same trick work over and over and over again.
Don't you think we're catching on after 50, this is...
Why do you think people are catching on? It's because of the alternative media, don't you think?
Well, it is. I think it's been since the sinking of the Maine, these these nonsense cover stories that we get concocted here by intelligence agencies trying to bamboozle people into being whipped up over war. I think the internet's putting an end to, because there's too many of us out there who can say, wait a minute, I'm going to go find the Brookings Institute, what they were saying about this in 2012. I find Brookings Institute, they're talking about the plan that John Kerry is running out in front of the House and Senate this week.
Well, and even with all the lies they have, just Obama the other day said, I didn't set this red line. The world set this red line. Then we have the tape. Everybody has the tape, but it wasn't that long ago he actually said this.
In the final analysis, it doesn't make any difference. Bush, Obama, they're the same thing.
Yes.
This is the Democrats and Republicans. There's no difference anymore. This is all the bankers. This is all the...
But don't you see that there's perhaps a realignment going on in terms of libertarians versus authoritarians? I mean, certainly we see the leadership of Boehner and Pelosi. Like you said, the Democrats, it doesn't matter whether Democrats or Republicans, the leadership is firmly in the camp.
The leadership has gone so far off the deep end of being rewarded in Washington and being rewarded for selling these lies, that I think the rank and file of both parties have said enough. And the group within the Democrats who have always been predisposed towards peace and not wanting war have joined with the constitutionalists on the right. And those of us who are saying, again, these wars are pointless. We're being bamboozled into them. It's a lie. And so a new alignment's occurring, and I think when people are just basically tired of big government lies. And
that's exactly what it is. Now, I'm afraid, Dr. Corsi, we have come to the end of our broadcast. So I just want to get the final thoughts from you, David, and then from Dr. Corsi.
Well, I guess I'm wondering, and I'll ask you, Dr. Corsi, what do you think will happen? The public is overwhelmingly against this. What if Congress gets bought up and they vote for this? And then what if they don't? What if they follow the public, and then Obama goes ahead and ignores the Congress and goes ahead and strikes? What do you think of those two scenarios?
First, let's deal with the first one. I think the best line of defense we have right now is the House of Representatives, because they're all up for re-election within pretty close to a year now. And I think there's enough anger in the American people. Let's just fire them all. And when they get the idea they're going to lose, I don't think they want to go into election trying to explain why they got bamboozled into another Tonkin Gulf lie. Secondly, if Obama decides to go ahead without Congress, then I think there's going to be a movement to say, yeah, we're tired of all this. Let's impeach him, because this reopens the issue. If, you know, the CIA is lying to us about chemical attacks in Syria, the NSA is lying to us about the surveillance of civilians.
Yes.
It may just be time to shut down this whole government. What do we need them for? If they're going to lie to us and, you know, rush us into the situations that are on the edge of World War III or on the edge of some totalitarian state that nobody wants to live in. Let's just say, you know, shut it down.
And it's the same ones that are going for the unconstitutional spying, the TSA, the indefinite detention without trial. They're also the ones who are pushing for war. It's that authoritarian wing that everybody is so disgusted with.
Well, it's the way to keep power and people in fear.
Yes.
I think finally people are saying, look, stop lying to us. Stop lying to us. You've got the IRS, you know, going after Tea Party groups you lied about. You got the NSA, you know, really looking at reporters. The employees of the NSA are looking at their boyfriends and girlfriends and husbands and wives.
Yeah.
They're spying on everybody.
Everybody, yeah.
Quit lying to us. We need this big facility built out in the West with all these buildings to store all this information.
Yeah, all those yottabytes they have out there.
We need to fund that. Let's reduce the deficit somewhat. Let's blow that thing up and
call a missile strike in on the Utah data center.
Hit it with a drone or two. Well, Dr. Corsi, David Knight, I definitely appreciate your time. I hate to cut you short there, Doctor. I know you have many more things, but hopefully we can get you back on the show, also on the Alex Jones radio show.
Anytime.
All right, thank you, Doctor.